Thank you everyone again for joining us for another installation of our Men's Mental Health Series, brought to you by Denver Health and Jason Vitello with the help of the community leadership team. This afternoon, we're going to bring you Jonathan McMillan, whose title to his presentation is The Natural and Unnatural Trauma of the American Black Male Existence. And before I introduce Jonathan, I do want to let everyone know that there's going to be opportunities to interact with this presentation. So Jonathan would like to have you guys answer either in chat or QA form, or if you want to chime in, he's going to give opportunities for a raise hand option that Jenna will use to unmute you at that time. And without further ado, Jonathan McMillan is a native son of Denver with roots that spread all over the metro area. He is the founder and chief success strategist of Be Better Than Average and author of 2 books, including I Am Better Than Average, 101 Affirmations to Help You Build and Live a Better Than Average Life. Jonathan has served as an outreach worker for Denver's Department of Public Safety's Gang Reduction Initiative of Denver, GREER Project. And in this role, he worked with current and former gang members who needed mentoring and support to successfully live positive, productive lives. Jonathan is involved with My Brother's Keeper, Denver, MBK, an initiative launched by President Obama. He is also an active participant and facilitator in roundtables and forums designed by the City of Denver's Office of the Independent Monitor, which is intent on improving the relationship between young people of color and law enforcement. Jonathan also co-chairs on the Community Advisory Board of Park Hill Strong, a youth violence prevention project, and sits on the City of Denver's Youth Violence Prevention Action Table. Jonathan McMillan considers his greatest achievements as being a father of 4 wonderful children and a husband to an amazing wife, Tamika. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jonathan. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Look, we're going to jump right into it. I have a pretty loaded presentation, and I literally was working on this up until the last minute because there was some just information that I want to make sure that I am able to share with you. My objective is that this be very much a value add into your life, and hopefully it will help you get a better understanding of just what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes. Honestly, to walk in my shoes, to walk in my son's shoes, to walk in a Black man's shoes, and understand just how much of the baggage a Black man in America is carrying on a daily basis. Excuse me as I mute my phone. Excuse me, that was so rude. We're going to jump into it. You'll hear a little bit more about me, my story, as we get into the presentation here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Can you give me a thumbs up if you could see the screen? Or Henry, can you let me know?
You're good.
All right. So what we see here is a quote from James Baldwin. And I want to highlight part of it where he says, the world should not pass judgment upon the Negro, especially upon the Negro youth, too quickly or too harshly. The Negro boy has obstacles, discouragement, and temptations to battle with that are little known to those who are not situated with as he is. When a white boy undertakes a task, it is taken for granted that he will succeed. On the other hand, people are usually surprised if the Negro boy does not fail. And that brings us into, again, the natural and unnatural trauma of the American Black male existence. We're going to work today to destroy the myth that trauma is normal for Black men. So let me start here. This will be the foundation from what we're working with. From the infant mortality rate to the life expectancy rate, race is the #1 predictor of a person's success. With that being said, Black men are the most vulnerable racial gender group for almost every health condition in the United States. What do I mean by that? Life expectancy for Black men is lower than any other group in the United States. Also, Black babies are twice at risk for dying before they turn the age of 1. Now, I wasn't sure if I was going to share this or not, but in the spirit of this is going to be probably is one of the most transparent times I've ever been in this public setting. Just a little over a year ago, almost 2 years ago. I lost a granddaughter right after she turned 1. And the cause of death is still to this day undetermined. I have a whole lot of speculation as to why that happened, but the fact of the matter is, Black youth, Black infants are more likely to die than any other, again, racial group in America, and even more so when you add in the gender factor of male or female. Black males literally have the lowest life expectancy in this country. So now that we got the foundation laid out, I want to get a sense of who am I talking to, since I've already declared that I'm going to be very transparent. Let me find out who's here and why you're here. So in the chat, I would love for you to share out your name and your occupation, and then also why you chose this workshop and what are you looking to get out of it. All right, I see some friendly names in the chat here. Sarah, Latoya. Latoya says she's just looking to learn and participate. Jamie says sexual abuse and trauma therapist, and I work. Ooh, it's going fast now. I work with diverse populations of adolescents. I want to know how to better serve them. Karen Lee is a restorative justice facilitator, getting a greater understanding so as to create more equity in our practice. Sarah Vogel from Colorado Springs, retired middle school counselor, and now working with Youth Transformation Center, doing restorative justice, taking this to learn. Cassandra, probation officer. I'm hoping to get a deeper understanding of the trauma of people of color. All right, Sam. Sam is a social worker, wanting to understand my clients better. All right, well, now that I know what your expectations are, and let me first welcome everybody who has joined. I'm so happy and I recognize the privilege that I have in being able to share this time with you, share some of my experiences, share some of my knowledge, and even if I humbly say some of my expertise in the fact that I am an expert at being a Black man. I have done so successfully for 47 years. As I said in my bio, I'm a father, husband, son, uncle, nephew, business owner, Black man. And all of those things are what I wear on a daily. Also, I'm a former gang member, and I was incarcerated very early on in my adulthood. And even in my adolescence, I hit jail several times. But at the age of 25, I ended up going to the Colorado Department of Corrections, spent a little over 2 years there, and had more or less an awakening, an epiphany that the existence that I had grown accustomed to was not natural, that it was just not the way that things were supposed to be in God's grand design. And I realized that there were a lot of different factors that led up to me finding myself inside a prison cell. Not only myself, but looking around the prison cell, I'm almost in that moment right now where I could look around the day room of the prison and understanding that so many people who I was connected to by 1, 2, 3 degrees of separation were on the exact same path because they had experienced life the exact same way that I had, and understanding and thinking that their destiny in life was going to be either a graveyard or a prison cell. And so I have spent pretty much the last 20 years since back then figuring out a way to change the narrative, to shift the paradigm, and basically empower people, but particularly Black people, but particularly Black men, shift the narrative, change the narrative, and shift the paradigm so that they know that they are more than somebody else's opinion of them. They are more than just a statistic. They are more than this kind of fatalistic mindset that they exist in. Not discounting that mindset, not discounting the experiences, but having a greater understanding of how those experiences, how that mindset is formed, and bringing into totality of the experience of a Black man. How do we get them as a whole, individually, but collectively as a whole, to a place where they're healthy, they are contributors of society, to their families, to their communities, to themselves, and realize the possibility of being healthy and whole and happy. All that being said, I want to start with I am not a licensed or certified or accredited or degreed or claim to be any sort of professional mental health practitioner or professional. I'm not a social worker. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a licensed counselor. I am just a person who has gone on this journey to get a better understanding of mental health and mental illness, honestly, mental health, trauma, and the experiences that cause harm to the Black male existence. Now, I've given you a primer as to who I am, why we're here, but I truly want everybody to get a true understanding of when I talk about the natural and unnatural trauma that exists, that's presence in just the existence of being a Black American Black male. I put together a video for you to witness and hopefully maybe even experience a little bit, a brief bit of what it's like to be a Black male in America. I'm going to warn you now that some of the things that you're going to see are disturbing, they're troubling, and they can be traumatic. You may be triggered if this arouses something in you, a past experience, or a just a feeling or a thought that you may find uncomfortable. So, with that being said, I am going to begin.
At the bottom of our news tonight, there's been a new animal aimed in the direction of falling off the face of the earth. Yes, young Black teenagers are recorded to be the oldest and the newest creatures added to the endangered species list. As of now, the government has not made steps to preserve the plants. When asked why, a top law official adds,
I want to hear you say your name. Your name is Toby. What's your name? Good. Lord God, help me, boy. What's your name?
Trayvon Martin, buying Skittles and iced tea at the 7-Eleven. And tonight, police reporting where, for the first time, hear eyewitnesses describe Zimmerman's behavior the seconds after the shooting.
We begin tonight with that chilling piece of video live streamed on Facebook in the moments after a man is shot by police. His girlfriend in the car pulling out her phone and then capturing the moments right after. Her exchange with the police officer, now seen by millions across this country. And just a short time ago, the governor of Minnesota asking, would this have happened if those passengers were white? He said, I don't think so. We begin with ABC's Gio Benitez in Minnesota.
Stay with me. This is Diamond Reynolds streaming live on Facebook from her cell phone just moments after her boyfriend, Philando Castile, was shot by police during a traffic stop over what she says was a broken taillight. She says Castile told the officer he was carrying a licensed gun.
He's licensed to carry. He was trying to get out his ID and his wallet out his pocket, and he let the officer know that he had a firearm and he was reaching for his wallet, and the officer just shot him in his arm.
The police officer pointing his gun into the car. Reynolds calm and clear. Her young daughter in the back seat.
Waiting for a back. I will, sir. No worries. I will. He just shot his arm off. We got pulled over on Larpener.
I told him not to reach for it. I told him to get his hand off it.
You told him to get his ID, sir, and his driver's license. Oh my God, please don't tell me he's dead. Please don't tell me my boyfriend just went like that.
Eyewitnesses to the assassination say that Dr. King left his room 306 at the Lorraine Hotel just before dinner to get some air. He walked over to the railing at this spot, and noticing some friends below, he leaned over and began to speak with them. Police say 205 feet away, in a window in a flop house, the assassin waited. He fired a single shot, hitting his target squarely, and then he ran.
His hands immediately went in the air, and he turned around towards the officer face to face. He started to tell the officer that he was unarmed and that you should stop shooting me. Before he can get his second sentence out, the officer fired several more shots into his head and chest area, and he fell dramatically in the fetal position. I did not hear once he yelled, freeze, stop, or hope. It was just horrible to watch.
Cannot believe it's been 20 years. It has been a long, long journey, but I'm healing.
Amadou Diallo's mother, Kadia, too, holds back tears. The last time she heard her son's voice was January 31st, 1999.
He was calling with the good news. He said, Mom, I finally have saved enough money. I'm going to realize my dream. I was so proud. I didn't think that a couple days later he would be gone.
Diallo was just 22 when his life was cut short by a hail of NYPD bullets. Officials say 41 shots were fired by plainclothes officers outside of his Bronx apartment building back on February 4th, 1999.
I'm in La Mesa right now. You see this officer right now? Right now, he does not have his lights on. You cannot touch me. You cannot touch me.
Sit down.
Sir, can you call the police?
Sit down.
You cannot touch me. You cannot touch me. You see this? You cannot touch me. You cannot touch me.
America's largest police force is facing a serious controversy over a video that's gone viral showing officers arresting a suspect who later died. The video is wrenching.
One of them puts his forearm around Garner's neck. More police join in, pinning him to the ground as he cries out. The father of 6 was rushed to a local hospital where he died.
We can see Floyd pinned face down by the knee of the officer, later confirmed by the department as Chauvin. Floyd remained pinned on the ground. At 8:25 p.m., nearly 5 minutes after Frazier started filming, onlookers confronted the officers about Floyd's condition. After it appeared he was not conscious.
Right now, bro. No, bro, look at him. He's not responsive right now, bro.
I look for him and I don't see him. I listen for him and I don't hear him.
The last time Claudia Lacy saw and heard her 17-year-old son, Lennon Lacy, was around the time he snapped this selfie. The caption, last night pic before the game. Lennon headed out for a walk the night of August 28th. They never saw him alive again the next morning.
It's a black male hanging from the swing.
Lennon's body was found dangling, covered in fire ants in the center of a mobile home park.
And tonight, a new video has now emerged. The initial video showing the officers tackling the father of five, taking him down, and moments later, firing multiple shots.
Tonight, new chilling images of that deathly shooting captured on cell phone outside a Baton Rouge convenience store. One officer pinning 37-year-old Alton Sterling to the ground while another kneels on his arm. You can see one officer drawing his weapon. Within seconds, gunfire. Sterling dying there at the scene with gunshot wounds to his chest and back.
The camera is jostled around as Arbery approaches a stopped truck and tries to run around it. But a shot is fired as he's confronted by two armed men, leading to a struggle. It moves in and out of the camera's view. The 25-year-old is hit and collapses.
He was out for his daily job, and he was hunted down like an animal and killed.
I believe that the whole United States is mourning with me. And if the death of my son can mean something to the other unfortunate people all over the world, then for him to have died a hero would mean more to me than for him just to have died.
Emmett Till, 14, was kidnapped and killed allegedly for wolf whistling at the wife of accused Roy Bryant.
It's not just that they discover his body and that he's been killed. He has been brutally, brutally beaten. And it takes a lot of hatred and a lot of rage to do the kind of violence that was done to Emmett Till. Being a black boy in the American South could be quite perilous.
All right. So what are your thoughts? No, I don't want you to know your thoughts. What are your feelings about that video? Feel free to put it into the chat. Feel free to speak openly. I just want to get some context to that video. When I first went to put it together, I was intending on 30 seconds, a minute at most. But as I started to search the clips that I wanted to include to adequately narrate and establish a narrative of the experience that I'm looking to share today, it was just overwhelming of how many clips existed over the last 400 years, but even more recently, over the last 10 months even. I'm going to read some of the comments here. I see outrage, shame, I feel sick, I feel sadness, I feel anxiousness, despair that such horrible events continue over and over, disgust, fury, overwhelmed, deep sadness, grief. My gut hurts, my mind is enraged, and my thoughts are what's next. Horror, disgust, deep horror and sadness. Really no words to describe these experiences. The fact that this happens over and over and over makes me feel sick to my stomach. It's overwhelming. Shame, guilt, heartache, anger, terror, sadness. But honestly, it doesn't matter what I feel when people are dying. Rage, stress, hopelessness, enraged. Taylor's as soon as I started crying, as soon as I saw Trayvon Martin, and did not stop throughout. There's a lump in my chest. I feel overwhelmed with this grief, anger, disgust, exhaustion. So yes, it seems like we all are pretty much in alliance with the feelings. I know a couple of people had said they felt some anxiousness in their stomach. Are there any other physiological responses to the video? And if you don't mind, you can feel free to. You don't have to put it into the chat, but you're more than welcome. But also, I'm open to hearing some feedback from what you're feeling about the video. Can't move, tension, increased heart rate, nausea, paralyzed, nerve shaking, wanting to run away and wanting to stay with it, paralyzed, and sent shivers up my spine and feeling like I'm going to puke, sick to my stomach, intense call to action, had to look away at points, rage is never ending. Yes, I all of those feelings and sensations, emotions, physical responses are absolutely appropriate. What I would like to do is give us about 2 minutes to kind of decompress. But as you decompress and we're going to move into the next part of this presentation, I would like for you to think about everything you're feeling right now, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. Imagine carrying that every day, all day, for the simple fact of your gender identity and your skin color, and having to tap that down to function acceptably in society. We'll be back here at 2 o'clock. I'm going to pause just for a little bit here for people to take some time to compose themselves, and we'll be right back. Feel free to, if you want to, feel free to ask any questions, raise your hand. Henry and Jenna are going to help me with that in the chat. And like I said, we'll be back at 2 o'clock, starting right back at 2. Okay, guys, we are back. I want to jump in. Thank you for sticking with me. I hope that everybody was able to kind of decompress. You know, the polite thing would be for me to apologize for making you feel uncomfortable, but if you know me, I'm not going to apologize for being authentic. And I'm really hoping that we're in a new level of this relationship. I did not mean to cause anybody any grief, but I am attempting to make a point as best as possible. With that, we're going to move into some of the more, I guess, academic pieces of this presentation. again, a lot of this will be for just establishing a understanding. This may be very, very common knowledge for most of you because you're professionals working in this space. Again, I do not want to present myself as being a professional mental health practitioner or anything of the sort. I happen to have studied a lot of this for a very long time because it's relevant, again, not only to the work I do, but it's relevant to my life. Of being a father of four, three of those being Black men, Black boys, I want to know as best as possible, like many of you, how do I adequately serve my community, my tribe, and my family? So we're going to talk very quickly about the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences, which is basically a subset of child adversity. And for the most part, the ACEs really looks at three different categories of bad experiences that children could go through that will most likely probably have a effect on their well-being later on in life. Those categories fall into three categories: abuse, neglect, and household challenges. Looking at abuse in the form of physical abuse, emotional and sexual abuse. Neglect could be physical and emotional neglect. And the household challenges is a lengthier list with mental challenges, incarcerated experiencing a relative that was incarcerated, substance abuse in the home, seeing their mother or mother figure treated poorly or violently, and divorce and separation. Now, it's important to say, and I'll probably say this multiple times, these ACEs can have serious consequences, especially when they occur either early on in life or frequently in life, and the more that they accumulate over the course of a child's childhood. So these are for the references of the ACEs. These are things that a person has experienced before the age of 18. Again, they could lead to periods of lifelong physical and mental health problems. However, the adversity of childhood, the ACEs does not predestine a child or an adult to poor outcomes. The thing that really counterbalances the ACEs in a child's life is the resilience factors and the protective factors that they have in their life. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit here. What I would like to do is as a group, we're going to go through the ACE survey relatively quickly. So I would ask if you have a piece of paper and something to write with, or you can use your phone. This is 10 very brief questions that we're going to go through. I want you to, if you answer the question with a yes, you give yourself 1 point. So you can tally it, you can write a 1, I don't care how you do it, but you want to keep score, accumulating the number of points that you have, and at the end of that will be your ACE score. So I can't see you all. I'm going to assume that everybody's ready. I'm going to fly through this. I apologize for the quick pace in this, but we do have a lot of information that I want to make sure I give to you. So let's go ahead and get this started. The first set of questions apply to the household, and asking, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, humiliate you, act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? So did you have a parent in the household that was abusive to you verbally and emotionally? If it's a no, you don't get a point. If it's a yes, then go ahead and award yourself 1 point. The next question, did an adult or a parent in the household push, grab, slap, throw something at you? And did they ever hit you so hard that you had marks on you and you were injured? Again, 0 if this was never the case for you, or 1 if this happened to you often or very often. And then the next one is, did a parent or adult in the household touch or fondle you, or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt to actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Again, if you didn't experience this, there's no points that go down. If you did experience this, then you want to score a point on here. Next set of questions. Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved or thought you were important or special? Did your family not look out for each other? Did they not feel close to each other or support each other? Were they unsupportive of each other? Yeah, it's a 0 or 1. It's really a binary scoring system, 0 or 1. And then in your household, did you have enough to eat? Did you have to wear dirty clothes and have no one to protect you? Were your parents too intoxicated to take care of you or take you to the doctor or give you the things that you needed to be a healthy, whole child? Did that happen in your childhood often or very often? If the answer is no, 0. If the answer is yes, then 1 point. Next, was your household stable and safe? Were your parents separated or divorced? That's again, a yes or no. Yes being 1 point, no 0 points. Did anyone in your household ever go to prison? Yes, 1 point, no 0 points. And then lastly, was your mother or stepmother or mother figure often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Did she experience and did you witness physical abuse of your mother, stepmother, or mother figure? Was she ever kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard? Ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a weapon of some sort, a gun, knife, or some other type of weapon? Yes is 1 point, and no is 0 points. And then lastly, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker, alcoholic, or used any type of pharmaceuticals illegally, whether that's street drugs like heroin, cocaine, but also may have abused prescription medicines? So yes is 1 point, no is 0. And last question, was a member of your household depressed, mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? So 0 is for a no answer, and a yes answer equates to 1 point. All right, so now what I would like for you to do is tally up your ACEs, your score. And if you feel comfortable, I would like for you to share what that score is in the chat. All right, some zeros. 8, 2, 3, 0, 0, 0, 5, 1, 0, 4, 8, 1, 3, 10, 2, 6, 2, 1, 9, 4, 2, 1, 7, 4. All right. I appreciate everybody for participating in that, and I appreciate even more for your willingness to share your scores with me in the group. I can say my score is, believe it or not, I don't know what my score is. I forget what it is. I think last time I took it was 7. I think it's 7 or 8. And again, I appreciate you taking time and participating and sharing your score, because I mean, this is an intimate experience. This is a place where, it's kind of a look in the mirror or a look in the rear view and seeing what all the experiences that have shaped your journey and your trajectory thus far. Now, science says, research says that if you have a score of 4 or higher, that you're more likely to experience some pretty severe health issues, some mental health issues, and difficulties in life. Now, as I mentioned before, and again, I'll mention it multiple times probably, statistics, they exist for a reason, and I do not discount them at all. you also have to understand that there are a variety of factors, protective factors, resilience factors, and other things that account for a young person, particularly most of us, I would say, who are engaged and even in this seminar with those high scores, that brought us here. You know, we are on a journey to make the most out of our lives and contribute as much as possible positively into the world in which we exist, despite what has happened to us in the past. I had a mentor of mine, many of you may know Reverend Leon Kelly. He used to say, when you asked him, how are you? He would say, blessed anyway, right? You know, and I know he said that for a variety of reasons, but that's always stuck with me, that, you know, amongst the chaos and the traumatic world that we live in, I'm still blessed anyway. And just having that mindset and understanding that I have some measure of grace over my life, and then I have some efficacy in how I move forward, prepares me and gives me hope in order to look at what is possible and not just what is or what has happened in the past. Is there any questions about any of that? I want to open up the chat real quick. Anybody have any questions or anything? All right, well, we're going to jump in, or we're going to move on. Now, in addition to what is on the ACE survey, there are some unconsidered ACEs as well. And, you know, again, I keep reemphasizing that I am not a professional at all, but I am a studied person, and I've looked into this, and with the intention of having a better understanding of knowing this subject matter and how to apply it to my immediate family and the young people who I work with. There are other unconsidered ACEs, I would say, like economic hardship or poverty, experience, if the death of a peer or a very close friend, or, you know, a classmate. And I'm looking at my slide here, and I see that I forgot to update it. So no judgments here. And then a negative experience with authority figures. And that could be any authority figure, everyone from a parent, a teacher, a mentor, a community leader. There can law enforcement. That's particularly who I thought about when I said negative experience with an authority figure. And that experience doesn't have to be a personal experience. It could be a vicarious experience, a negative experience with an authority figure, like what we're seeing right now on the news on a daily basis when we see incidents like George Floyd, or Mr. Blake, Jacob Blake, or Trayvon Martin, or any of these people who have had tragedy met out to them from authority figures, or people who are acting in the experience of authority people. Now, back to what I was saying, there are also signs of resilience and risk protective factors that help, well, like the term says, protective factors help protect a person, particularly a child, against some of those adverse childhood experiences. I'm not going to go very deep into most of these. I just want to highlight that these risk factors, these protective factors, are things that we as professionals working with youth can really look to foster in our practices and how we develop relationships with the youth who are in our charge and their families. I want to emphasize that, and their families. So we talk about emotional resilience, having the belief that their mother or their parental figure loved them. Physical, having a physical protective factor in knowing that their parents were showing them affection appropriately and signs of love. There's a book out there, I think it's like the love languages, and physical is one of those. It's giving a child a hug or you know, rubbing their head or, you know, tapping them on the shoulder and just showing appreciation in appropriate ways. You know, believing that their father or their mother loved them when they're little. Other risk factor or protective factors that build resilience. Having community people and other people outside the home that believed in them and showed up to inspire, encourage, and to assist and advise. Having people in the family who, cousins and other people around the family who help develop those relationship bonds and connection to others outside the immediate home. Being around people in the neighborhood are other protective factors. Helping the child develop that mindset, that growth mindset, where they understand the power of yet. And forgive me, I can't think of the lady who wrote that incredible book, Carol Dweck, Growth Mindset, which really emphasized helping a child understand that their past and even their present doesn't necessarily predict their destiny or what they're capable of in the future, and helping build that resilience to try again, be willing to fail, be willing to push through some of the difficulties and challenges to make it to that next level and obtain the success that we want. Helping the child build the social emotional skills to develop friendships and intimate relationships with other people are protective factors which help build resilience against the adverse childhood experiences. I think I saw there was a couple of comments in the chat here. Serena said, I would like to add natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina. Yes, absolutely. That is an absolute adverse childhood experience. Real quick side note, Serena, I lived in Houston, Texas in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit. And, you know, it took a few weeks before they were able to evacuate the city. And when they did evacuate, they bussed people in from the Superdome in Louisiana over to Houston, Texas, and into the parking lot of the old Astroworld. And literally overnight, 250,000 people, 250,000 people moved into the city of Houston. And probably anywhere between a fourth and a third of those people were school-age children. And I, at the time, was dating a young lady who had a son who was just entering high school. And I got the opportunity to interact with some of those children who had been so displaced and uprooted from everything that they knew that, and I'm probably going to go into this a little bit later, but these children were their whole world was uprooted, right? And many of them, the resiliency that you saw in many of them was just fascinating and amazing, because by nature, children are resilient. The other piece of that is when you look at some of the risk factors that are unconsidered in the typical survey, poverty, in the conditions within a neighborhood and community, which are detrimental to a child's health, were the conditions that many of these young people were going through, experiencing in New Orleans. They were practically in a swamp environment, and at the time, New Orleans was like the murder capital of the world. The fact that they actually got some relief from that experience and from that environment by being uprooted from where they were and placed in warm homes and were given just some more of the protective factors and saw community members and the world at large kind of focusing on them and providing them with stuff that they weren't getting in their homes. You saw a lot of those young people really start to thrive. So you know, it's about how we show up as a community, as the caregivers, as the caretakers, as the trusted adults in the room, in the building, in these children and their families' lives that can and will make a difference. So next, I want to talk about trauma and understanding that trauma is different than ACEs. Now, ACEs, the adverse child experiences, does not mean is not equivalent to trauma. Trauma has a little bit of a different definition in the fact that trauma occurs when an external threat overwhelms a person's coping resources or abilities. So the best way to explain this and to put it into terms that I was able to understand the difference, and I'm sure many of you are much smarter than me, but understanding that ACEs can happen in a child's life doesn't mean that they rise to the level that they overwhelm that child's coping mechanisms, resources, abilities. When it does get to that point where it overwhelms that child's resources, abilities to cope with those experiences, then that's when you're moving into the world of trauma. Of course, you know, again, I don't want to go too deep. I'm assuming that the majority of the people in this presentation have at least a basic understanding of what trauma is, and probably a more thorough understanding than even what I do in my lay experience. But just so to make sure that we're using shared definitions and we're all reading from the same page, same book, same page, there's acute trauma, which is one single stressful or dangerous event, right? There are a couple of people who, when they shared their ACEs out in the chat, recognize that they have one ACE, one adverse child experience. That one adverse child experience could have been that one moment of trauma in their lives, right? But doesn't mean that it rose to the level of trauma. It just could have been, it could have been. There is a possibility that was a traumatic experience, not an adverse experience. Well, it was adverse, but rising to the level of being traumatic. Complex trauma, and this is where we're probably going to spend the rest of this presentation with the understanding of complex and chronic trauma. Complex describes both child's exposure to multiple traumatic events, often at invasive and interpersonal nature. So meaning that multiple traumatic events are happening, and it's happening at a very high intensity, and it's very personal. So, you know, we're talking about abuse, physical neglect. We're talking about drug use in the home. We're talking about parents separated, divorced, and we're talking about witnessing a parent figure being physically abused. We're talking about losing a peer or a friend to death or other circumstances. Multiple things that happen over the course of a period of time. That period of time could be an entire childhood, and they're very intense and they are very personal. Chronic trauma, this results from repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events. So chronic could be, maybe it's just one or two of those, well, probably just one traumatic event, but happening continuously with no relief in sight. Is there any questions about that before I move on? All right, I'm having some technical issues here. Hold on 1 second. All right, here we go. So next I want to talk about historic and intergenerational trauma, which is essentially the culmination of everything that we just talked about, of all the above, right? So historical trauma is an example of intergenerational trauma, and it's caused by events that targets a group of people. So when we're talking about, say, I don't know, for purposes of this presentation, Black people, right? And the the trauma that the people as a whole have experienced over, say, I don't know, 400 years since slavery. Well, I won't even say slavery, since their ancestors were kidnapped and brought by force to America to do forced labor under the threat or under the experience, experience of violence. There is a trauma. That rises to the level for most people to a traumatic level of experience. So when you talk about historical and intergenerational trauma, family members who have not directly experienced the trauma can still feel the effects of the event in generations later. Our children and grandchildren are shaped by the genes that they inherit from us, and research is revealing that the experience of hardships or violence can leave their mark on our legacy genes. The field of intergenerational trauma is still relatively young, and trauma researchers have made a lot of progress and strides in understanding how single episode present life trauma is just starting to be is beginning to impact the next generation in next generations in that expression of trauma. The concept of historical trauma was first brought up by Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart in the 80s as a way to basically explain to people who were ignorant and unable to understand why Native Americans were unable to realize and experience the quote-unquote American dream. I'm not even going to go too deep in that because I think that we all, and you know, I'm making an assumption that most of us can probably, after watching that video, conceptualize just how traumatic it can be to an entire people when, again, you are not only colonized, but essentially invaded, and then your entire people are then decimated, and then the survivors of that decimation are expected to rise to a level of contribution into their own success when everything that they've ever known, and even including their past and their history, has been stolen from them violently. So just some quick examples of intergenerational trauma. One of the ones that you'll hear most often in the media and in academic speak is the Holocaust. And research has shown that there was a heightened anxiety response and heightened stress response from the offspring of survivors who themselves suffer from PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder. There's also been some research shown in survivors of 9/11, pregnant women who were present in New York around the time of the tragedy of the planes crashing into the towers. They exhibited signs of PTSD, and then their offsprings also exhibited signs of PTSD. But even further, now I guess I'll talk about this more in cultural trauma, but again, that's showing how the stress hormone in response can be passed from one generation to the next. And then of course, there's, as we've been mentioning, slavery. And there's even a concept of post-traumatic slavery syndrome as described by Dr. Joyce DeGruy. And essentially, Dr. Joyce DeGruy says post-traumatic slavery syndrome looks at multi-generational trauma together with continued oppression and the absence of opportunity to heal or access the benefits available in society leads to post-traumatic slave syndrome. So in other words, so you've had traumatic experiences that chronic and complex trauma that we talked about earlier happening to multiple generations of a certain people, then that's passed down to the trauma response is passed down to multiple generations, in addition to ongoing traumatic events happening to that next generation and then that next generation, in addition to the absence of any opportunity to really heal or access the benefits or the luxuries of society at large, which in of itself, when we talk about poverty and food insecurity and housing insecurity and a lot of the things that, while are not specific to the black male experience, the black men experience them at disproportionate levels. So you add all those things up, and that's what really comes in as a definition of post-traumatic slave syndrome. I'm gonna pause for a second here to look at the chat. I thought a traumatic experience was. I thought a traumatic experience was trauma regardless of how received, but you stated experience is trauma like season. Yes. Thank you for your time. I very appreciate different perspectives. Oh, sorry to see you go, Samantha. Mark, and then watching for years. Mark, that's a great analogy. Imagine being raped over and over again, forced to have the rapist's baby, and watching your family beaten for years and never getting any support and dealing with that trauma. The experience, pain, and survival tactics. The flip side, the concept of supremacy is passed on, which furthers the trauma. The trauma is real. So Mark, and I would just add to that, imagine being raped over and over and forced to have the rapist's baby. And then what about, and not to be gruesome, but this is a reality, watching that being the child of that, born of that rape, and then being raped, and understanding that your mother was raped, you're now being raped, and most likely, if you bear children of that rapist, that child is going to also experience that, right? This is the reality of what I'm talking about. All right. So thank you all for your comments. I'm going to move on. Looks like we have a little less than 30 minutes, so I'm going to probably fly through some of this relatively quickly, including this particular slide. This just kind of underscores everything that I was just talking about the intergenerational historic trauma. Very quickly, in a nutshell, there was a study taking place on laboratory mice where the researchers introduced the aroma of cherry blossoms to a mouse. And then they treated that mouse after introducing the aroma with a very mild electrical shock, okay? And of course, mild is relative, but it was enough to elicit a response from the mouse. And they did this multiple times, and then they allowed the mice to mate and then give birth. And then what they found in that next generation of mice, the babies that were born, that when they introduced the aroma of the cherry blossoms, those baby mice reacted in the exact same way as the mice who had been treated with the electrical shock after they had been introduced to the aroma. Not only that, but their babies also reacted adversely to the aroma of the cherry blossom because that fear response, that smell response had been passed down from one generation to one generation. So there's actually some science behind this. Epigenetics, yes. Thank you, Howard. I was going to speak on it. It was on another slide there. So, so looking at complex and inherited trauma and the way it can affect children in a multitude of ways. What I want to do now is just open up the conversation, the chat, and you all have been using the chat very respectfully. I thank you. What are some of the ways that our children can be affected by complex and inherited trauma as it relates to our day-to-day work, right? In our various professions? How does complex and inherited trauma show up in working with the youth that we are looking to serve? Particularly keeping in mind, we're talking about African-American and Black boys and young men. And if you don't want to put it in the chat, feel free to open up your mic. And again, I can't necessarily see who has their hands raised, so I'm going to lean on Henry Henry and Janet to help me out here. Serena says they have trouble with self-regulation, emotion regulation, and trouble learning. Absolutely. Julie says dealing with school shootings. So I'm not going to peel that onion. But school shootings, that's a very complex one. But yes, and I would love to dig into that, but just not right now. We don't have the time. Mental health and suicide ideation, hyperdefensiveness, fear, defensiveness. And so many in schools, we see white-centric systems, zero tolerance triggers for trauma experience to re-traumatize children and result in them being punished and pushed out. Stepping into their dreams emotionally and mentally, having the confidence to build businesses. Absolutely, Jess. Yes. You trouble with relationships, self-awareness, continuous fight or flight, fight-flight response, callous authority figures, hypervigilance. Yes. Everybody is spot on. Sarah, distrust the school system and those in it. Absolutely. So these are all ways, and you know, I'll say this, I guess as a disclaimer, it might be too late. I work a lot with young men and young people who are involved in the criminal justice, juvenile justice system. And I have seen some of these young men commit some pretty heinous crimes, all the way up to murder, including murder. And I will never, ever justify violence or homicide or anything of that sort, because you know it just, the line I draw in the sand is that murder is wrong, right? Violence is wrong. Hurting somebody else is wrong. However, when you look at some of the experiences that some of these young people go through, the childhood adverse childhood experiences, the complex and historical and intergenerational trauma, physiologically, remember all that angst and that anger and that despair that we felt when we watched that video. It really does become difficult to regulate, self-regulate those emotions and those physiological sensations when you're constantly in a heightened stress response state. We're going to move on. These are all great answers, and I thank you all for sharing them. I'm going to fly through these slides because we pretty much nailed them already. Looking at cognition, thinking, and again, forgive me, I'm seeing now that I forgot to complete some of the template of my slides, but yes, absolutely, we're all on point here. Understanding that, again, trauma does have a physiological effect on the body, and that's that toxic stress response, you know, and that's comes from that complex chronic in the intergenerational trauma that some of these young people, young men, these boys and young men are experiencing, and this is where it starts to disrupt I'm calling pro-social behavior and pro-social norms. I was in a presentation yesterday and I heard this, Jim, and so I had to borrow it. The brain becomes habituated to its most consistent state. Social emotional regulation can be disrupted by toxic levels of stress chemicals, adrenaline, and cortisol. Executive function is also greatly diminished when the frontal cortex is flooded. So in context, again, of Sarah, I'm going, and I think Justin might have joined us, you know, I'm going to just speak to some of our experiences working with some of these boys and young men, when it's very difficult to get them to behave in a classroom when they have been triggered by what was, to most of us, would seem to be a very benign request, like, please sit down, or please focus, or please be quiet, or please be respectful, or please keep your hands to yourselves. And the response from the student that we're talking to is a Chernobyl level event, because they have already been working with this heightened stress level, and literally the stress hormone cortisone is just flooding their prefrontal cortex. And when they feel like they are in an uncomfortable situation, like being told no or trying to be managed, they go from 0 to 100 really quickly, right? The adrenal response to stress, trauma, survival can lead our body to think it's the norm or homeostatic state. Exactly. Hey, Justin. Yep, I shouted you out, brother. Kids have to have the ability to dream and be visionaries. When the dreams are constantly torn down, they may seem unreachable, despair is damp and darkened. Great point, Latoya. And I'm going to fly through some more things here so we can get to that point. So real quick, we've talked about the different types of trauma. We've talked about adverse childhood experiences. I want to ask a question to the group. What does this mean to you? Media and cultural trauma. Media and cultural trauma. How your culture is displayed in the media. Great answer, Jess. Images depicting your identity as lesser or objectified or dehumanized. Awesome answer. Thank you, Mary. Anybody else? In some ways, the trauma faced by people of color is glorified for, Cassandra, I have been known to say that there are entire industries dedicated to the trauma of people of color. Entire industries, whether it's the recording industry, movie industry, the news industry, whatever it is. I cannot think it's accidental that all of a sudden there's so much coverage over the protest of George Floyd and other people who have been killed recently. Is leading the news, and as the old adage says in journalism, if it bleeds, it leads. There are entire industries dedicated to exploiting people of color's trauma. Living against the stereotype about my people has been broadcast in dedicates, whether tragic mulatto, model minority, uneducated child, whatever people think they know about me. Regupta, that's awesome. That's awesome. You guys nailed it. I want to go to this next slide. There's multiple ways that cultural trauma shows up, or traumatic events, I could say, through trauma. I'm very, very, very concerned about right now, especially as we're talking about the pandemic and the children's with fewer opportunities to interact in person with caring, trusted adults, and in experiencing the social emotional connection that engages working with their peers, and the time, the unsupervised, uncontextualized time that they're spending on social media, as you're seeing not only reports of these traumatic events from traditional news sources on social media, but then you have everybody in your friends network who is also reposting and resharing sometimes some illegitimate news or information about the incidents, and it can become very damaging when you're experiencing this exposure to these traumatic events unadulterated on a consistent, constant basis. Also, I think Regutta just said about the false narrative. When you have false narratives out there, when growing up, I grew up as an adolescent under this false impression that I was more or less destined to end up in prison or be dead by the age of 25. And with that false narrative being given to me as kind of the script to live by, again, as I shared earlier, I ended up in prison at 25. And not only me, but hundreds of thousands of other young men who looked like me. And then lastly, when you look at the entertainment channels, and again, I just spoke on this, about the entire industries that have been created in order to profit and exploit the traumatic experiences of boys and young men of color, particularly Black boys. Cultural trauma narratives tell stories about heroes and martyrs, but this can create a false reality. LaToya, to your point, it could paint a paradigm of hopelessness, which leads to a sense of recklessness. And it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy when you've been told by the people you love, know, and trust that you probably were going to be dead or locked up by the time you're 25 years old. You don't really have a whole lot to aim for as far as wanting to achieve or accomplish more and great things out of life. And so it's like live fast, die young, you know, or die young, so live fast. And people engage in behaviors which end up getting them either killed or locked up. It's a snake eating its own head.
Yo, anybody see my diary? Oh, there it is.
Now, we don't have time to...
So what are you gonna do, KD?
Sorry.
You gonna mess around out there in the streets till you get killed?
We don't really have time to dig into these videos because we're coming up on 13 minutes before we have to close out, and I want to leave some time for people to ask questions and give feedback. I will make this, well, Janet will make this presentation available after we end here. What I have done here is I've highlighted some of the ways, some hip hop songs over the course that have come up over the course of the last probably 30 years or so. And the lyrics in them really kind of highlight, I won't say kind of, really highlight some of the angst and trauma and stress which these young Black men have released as poetry and as music, as a cathartic way of coping with what they're experiencing. That being said, growing up, I am a child of hip hop. I was born in '73, same year as hip hop. I truly appreciate being able to vicariously cope with what I was going through the shared experience of music. But what also I've witnessed over the last probably 20 years is that it's created almost a false narrative of hopelessness, and that there really isn't any opportunity for a person to escape those circumstances and not seek out the protective factors that also exist within the same communities and the same societies which contribute to the trauma in the first place. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you, Serena. Awesome. So, you know, is this a curated list? Some of my personal favorites. So when you get a chance, if you go to the recording that's made available, I think that this really helps. Really helps give an understanding.
So our session was about hip hop as a cultural touchstone and also as an expression of trauma and resilience, particularly in African American communities. Something that I think the audience took away from it is that the perspectives reflected in these songs are the experiences that a lot of people in certain neighborhoods and communities have contended with for decades in this country and continue to contend with. And so there's a way that there is valuable information about the lived experience of what it's like to be Black in America, whether you grew up poor and in a hyper-segregated community like Tupac and never went to college, or whether you went to college like J. Cole and were a college athlete and are dealing with sort of what it means to sort of straddle and try to still keep a foot in your home community while you're progressing in life. And so those themes of sort of entrenched social inequities, of intergenerational racial trauma,
and also resilience and being able to find a way to carve out something for yourself and be artistic and expressive in spite of all that was something that came up again and again. Part of what the lyrics demonstrate too, though, is that suicidality in Black men or in certain communities doesn't look the same. It doesn't necessarily look like cutting your own wrist or having thoughts of killing yourself. It may look like reckless behaviors that put you at risk for being killed by somebody else. So the issue of suicide by cop came up, and also how often that is part of what people are talking about, but it gets sort of embedded in all these other things. But when it comes to women and trauma, we often talk about borderline personality disorder or those traits and the chronic suicidality you see with women who have a trauma history. We see the same thing in men who have a trauma history. It just looks different, and people get so focused on the anger or the antisocial behaviors, they miss, Tupac at the beginning of Changes talks about, is life worth living? Should I blast myself, right? He leads the entire song with this question of, is this worth continuing to try to do, or do I just end this myself and take some agency over this because I don't feel like this world is changing? It may be.
So, any thoughts on that video quickly? Mary, I will go ahead and get you the link to that. I will share that out in kind of the bibliography that I'm compiling for this. Andrea, thank you for the feedback. I will, as Janet has assured me, they will make this available. Yes, I will get all of the links to the videos and my reference materials to everybody once this is released. I literally was working on this again to the last minute, so forgive me that I don't have some of these things prepared for you immediately. Really quickly, I want to talk about this concept of CTSD. And CTSD is this. So we're all familiar with, or most of us are pretty familiar with PTSD, which assumes that the traumatic event has happened, occurred, ended. And so the response post, the stress disorder is post a traumatic event. But as we've talked about already in most of this conversation, when we're talking about complex, chronic, intergenerational, whether you call it post-traumatic slavery syndrome, many of these experiences, as the video underlined, this is ongoing. This is something that happens all the time, whether you're talking about violence, poverty, education gaps, food insecurity, housing insecurity. These things are ongoing events happening in a person, in a Black boy, Black man's life. And so we have to start to think about what is continuous trauma, continuous traumatic stress disorder look like? What are we doing to account for ongoing trauma? What are we doing to make sure that our trauma-informed practices account for the trauma happening even as we're working with our boys and young men? So CTSD, as you see here, expand the concept of PTSD to address the reality that people can not only suffer multiple traumas at different stages, but that their exposure can be ongoing or continuous, right? So looking at the common risk factors for CTSD, they're pretty much the same as looking at a lot of the other risk factors, but through, again, a lens of this is still going on. So bullying, being raised by an alcoholic parent, poverty, homelessness, food insecurity, even workplace inequality. And I know a lot of us hate where we work, right? But that's different than having a hostile workplace and feeling like you have no efficacy or agency in order to change your conditions because you're in a job that you absolutely need in order to take care of your family. common symptoms of CTSD. They look very familiar as the common symptoms of other trauma-related diagnoses, learning disability, panic attacks, violent impulsive behavior. So it could be very easy to want to see that a person is exhibiting behaviors that look very similar to trauma that has been experienced in the past. But again, I want to have for purposes of this conversation, understanding that the Black male existence many times, not all times, but many times, is an ongoing traumatic experience. And many times when you're looking at the difference between PTSD and CTSD, you might ask a young person, like, what is the experience that they can identify that leads to their trauma? And they might have a lot of difficulty identifying just one or even just a few, because so much is going on at once, simultaneously. So I want to leave us with a little bit of hope. I want to honestly spend more time in this than time has allowed. But ultimately, I want to say that because you are here, I'm hopeful that you're engaging in this presentation. I'm hopeful that you are prepared to take into account how you are interacting with your Black boys and young men, and understand that there are ways to treat the trauma that they're going through. Not even treat the trauma, but to treat them as adults, as just basic human beings who have the capacity and have the right and the ability to be healthy and whole. So there are programs which properly implemented in initiatives targeting Black males that can be a part of a comprehensive racial justice strategy. Things you want to be aware of that I'm sure you're already doing within your practices and in your buildings is make sure that what you're doing is trauma informed. Make sure that you are owning your own biases and not limiting the potential success and the potential healing of that young people by the biases that you're bringing into that conversation. Make sure that you're bringing the proper level of treatment and services to the youth, and culturally relevant counseling. So understanding that Western medicine is not a be-all, end-all for everybody. You may need to find people, treatment providers who look like the young person who you're referring to services. There is relief. I'll almost end on here. There is relief. Once you start to begin that healing process and you step up into the plate of recognizing that this child can, or this young man can be healed and whole, they may just inherently and naturally begin moving further down the healing process, because just finding relief, finding someplace safe to decompress and feel safe in the moment can begin the healing process of further along. Once that suffering is no longer acute and immediate and constant, the resilience factors and protective factors may begin to kick in. So I wanted to ask some questions, but we are literally at 1 minute to closing. Is there any feedback or any questions that I can answer quickly here or address? Oh, there's a lot of things in the chat. All right. All right, let's see. Like to see that the videos, we understand the symptoms of depression in men, like anger. Hey, Maritza, good to see you. Catherine, good to see you. I'm feeling a lot of urgency. I understand how this is playing out right now, especially for school-age children who are exposed to trauma. They're experiencing TTSD in the context of COVID. As community leaders, how can we show up? That is a great question, Catherine. Catherine's question is, if children are experiencing CTSD, continuous traumatic stress disorder, in the context of COVID and remote learning, exacerbating this, how can community leaders, how do we show up? My simple answer is this, but this is not exhaustive, is that we asked our community leaders, our city leaders, to provide more access to culturally relevant, trauma-informed therapeutic services. Bottom line, whatever that could look like. There's a Caring for Denver grant that just opened up. Me and a couple of my community partners, you probably are aware of them, Dane Washington and Troy Grimes, we were pursuing some grant funds to basically fund a collective of trauma-informed, culturally relevant providers for free to community members who are going through, whether it's the CTSD because of COVID, well, actually it's because of COVID, the violence in the community, economic insecurity, housing insecurity, food insecurity, all the things that are happening in our neighborhoods throughout the city. We need to make sure that we're providing them trauma-informed, culturally relevant, low-cost or free services, even if they don't take advantage of them, making sure that they're available. Cassandra, thank you, thank you. It really could be a day-long training. Thank you for all the compliments. I'm glad, I hope this was valuable to everybody. I am available. My website is jonathanmcmillan.com. It's my first and last name.com. You can contact me there, email me. I think everybody knows how to get a hold of me. Yes, anything I could say. Yes, Catherine, I would love your assistance with that. Everybody, yes, my, you know what, here, I'm gonna put my email in the chat.
And Jason Vitello would just like to make a comment, so I added him to speak.
Oh yes, hey Jason, pleasure to have you here.
You might be having some issues with audio.
You might need to unmute.
There you go.
Jonathan.
Yes, sir.
This is Jason Vitello, man. Thank you so much for your presentation. Really amazing work and information. And thank you all in attendance. Please continue to spread the word on public health and public safety. Jenna, I believe we have 4 more sessions.
We actually have 5. We have added 2 new trainings for September 9th and September 11th. So if you go onto our Eventbrite page, you'll see the 2 new ones there. So you can go ahead and register, and again, please share out so we can gather more audience, anyone else who might be interested.
All right, right on. Thanks again, Jonathan.
Jason, thank you for inviting me and encouraging me to apply. So yes, thank you.
No doubt.
Well, that's all we have. Jonathan, if you're done, I think that's it for today.
That is it. Just want to thank everybody who has stuck around to this point. Again, I really appreciate you all for the work that you do. And feel free to reach out to me, contact me. And if I could be of value to the work that you're doing, I'd be more than happy to have that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today. And then hopefully we can see you here next week for our next presentation. It'll be done by Dwayne Meeks, and the title is What Happened to You? Applying Holistic Youth-Centered Engagement. And again, like I said, we added 2 more trainings. So if you are interested, please go ahead and sign up, and we'll continue seeing you here. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Henry.